Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. As always, my name is Jay, and in this video I want to talk to you about the new Balance Dataslate that came out today and how it nerfed some armies. Now, I'm going to talk about the rules in general and all the nerfs today. I'm going to talk about the points increases and decreases in a future video because there's tons of models that got affected by it. But the Balance Dataslate came out today. The Balance Dataslate's goal is to bring some armies within balance, bring down the top, increase the bottom, etc., bring them to the Goldilocks zone. I will argue, though, that they nerfed Geneseal Cult, they nerfed Imperial Knights, and they nerfed Aeldari. However, I still think Aeldari are as strong as ever, if not stronger. And I'll talk about that afterwards, but I want your opinions. Leave comments in the comment section down below. So, of course, there were several changes to the game today, and let's start with the core rules and then we'll go over some army specific rules. But you'll see they really do affect certain armies more than others, and Imperial Knights and Geneseal Cult I found particularly nerfed. Aeldari not as much, and I'll talk about that in a second. So first of all, devastating wounds. We have to start talking about devastating wounds. They've changed the way devastating wounds work. Instead of causing wounds that cannot be saved, and they're devastating, instead of causing mortal wounds, they've changed the wording so that now it just applies that they're wounds there cannot be any saves against. They're not mortal wounds anymore. So there can be no armor saves and no invulnerable saves against devastating wounds. They're no longer mortal wounds, and the big difference between the two is the fact that mortal wounds spill over to other members of the squad, versus now that they've taken away from mortal wounds, they just said saving throws of any kind cannot be made against these wounds. They're no longer mortal, and therefore they don't spill over to the next guy, i.e. you can't kill a squad of 6 guys with one shot if you rolled a 6. You know, because in the previous one, if you rolled 6 and you got like 6 mortal wounds, you could wipe out all 6 squad members, right? In this one, you can only kill 1. It doesn't spill over to the next guy and the next guy and the next guy and the next guy. This is a huge change overall. Now, once again, this is going to affect Aeldari, right? But it's going to affect everyone that has access to devastating wounds, but Aeldari are specifically nasty for devastating wounds, specifically the Wraith Knight, for example. The Wraith Knight can kill large squads of guys with very few shots because of the mortal wounds stacked with the fate dice, which is brutal. So now, just no saves of any kind. This will nerf the Wraith Knight. Right? And the Wraith Knight also got a points increase, but we'll talk about that in a future video. So again, all armies will be affected by devastating wounds because all armies theoretically have access to some devastating wounds. Aeldari will be primarily extra affected by it because, you know, they have more devastating wounds than anyone else. But even still, you know, it's a huge change to the game. The next big change is regarding firing OverWatch, right? The stratagem, 1 command point, you can fire when your opponent gets close to you. Cool stuff. There have been 2 big changes to OverWatch. Number 1, the target, if the enemy unit is visible to your unit, so it has to be visible. You can't do indirect fire to fire Overwatch. That's huge, right? That is a bit of Eldar trickery in there too. Space Marines with the Desolation squads. Indirect fire has been very powerful in this edition, and so now you have to actually be able to see the squad. You can't just, you know, if they're in proximity, flame them if you can't see them. So that's a huge change. The second one is, of course, you cannot target a Titanic unit with a stratagem. Ouch. So Imperial Knights can no longer Overwatch if they are the Titanic models. Only the little ones, the Armagers, can Overwatch. The big guys can't. And that's huge, because that gave Imperial Knights a way of buffing. If you're going to drop a unit near them that could assault them and tie them up for a long time, they could at least Overwatch and fire some crazy firepower at you, and that has been removed. Once again, a huge nerf to Imperial Knights in general, and some other Titanic models. Again, like, some armies have more Titanic models than others, but again, huge change, right? That's a huge change to the game. I respect that, yes. One of the new changes to Insane Bravery is the fact that you can only use it once per battle. That's a huge change, I believe. I believe that's new to the that you can only use it once per battle, and a unit from your army must take a battleship test, and the effect is that you automatically passes that battleship test, but it's before you take the battle shock test. So the big changes now to the stratagem is you can't roll first and then use the stratagem. You have to use the stratagem before rolling, so you have to take the risk that, instead of taking a risk with dice, you just automatically pass it. You can only use it once per game. Huge change there as well. That will affect most armies. Up next, we have a big change to Ruin's visibility section. They've added the sentence, towering models that are within this terrain feature can also see out as normal, but it's now the only exception. So they've changed towering, so towering can no longer see past terrain. That was one of the biggest changes for Imperial Knight players this edition, and they've now kind of brought it back to what it was in the past. They cannot see over terrain. The only way that they can see over terrain is if they're in the terrain, they can tow it, and then they can see through that terrain. Once again, a huge nerf to Imperial Knights. Yes. And it's a huge balancer. I find a lot of people are going to be very happy with it. I loved towering in this edition. It made sense to me, and so now that kind of hurts my heart a little bit. What do you think? I don't know if I like it. So those are the big rules that affect all the armies. Now let's go through some specific army rules that have been hit, and you're going to see just some of them are affected. So we'll start off with Aeldari, because they're, of course, the ones that people are thinking about along with the other two armies. The big change for Aeldari was the Phantasm stratagem, which allowed you to set certain squads in reserve above the normal amount. They've changed it to Aeldari Infantry. Select one Aeldari Infantry unit from your army, not just any squad. So that's huge. Now you only put infantry in reserve, not just any squad. Once again, that is a small nerf, but it's going to change games, obviously, because it prevents you from being able to put a Wraith Knight in reserve, but still, it's an effect. Another army-specific change is that Death Watch, just for the Dragonfire round stratagem, it's only for bolt weapons. Hellfire round stratagem, only for bolt weapons. Kraken round stratagem, once again, only for bolt weapons. So you have to only use bolt weapons when using the stratagems. Once again, nerfs them a bit because they can only use bolt weapons versus any weapon in general. Up next, we have the Genestealer Cult. Now, this is a section I want to talk about. I love Genestealer Cult. I love the way that they've been playing, and apparently they've been winning too much. They've been too competitive. They're one of the couple armies that can keep Eldar kind of in check, and this is why I want to talk about it in a bit. But they had a huge nerf, and it was their Cult Ambush Army rule got hit. And because it's that one, it affects most models in the army, right? So it's a very powerful change, and it will definitely make them less survivable in this edition. So what they've changed it as, instead of, when you lose an infantry squad, if it's their battle line, they automatically come back, everyone else comes back on a 4-up. Now it's on a 5-up, but +1 if it's infantry, +1 if it's battle line, and +1 if it's turns 1 and 2. And so if it's the first or second battle round, or if they're battle line, you can add 1. If you kill a squad of neophyte hybrids, turn 1, they come back on a 3-up, so 2/3 of the time. The rest of the game, after turns 1 and 2, they come back on a 4-up, which is a huge change from automatically to half the time. And the other guys, like if you kill squads of Genesealers, turns 1 and 2, they come back on a 4-up, otherwise they come back on a 5-up. So once again, going from half the time to 1/3 of the time. This is huge. This is a huge change. This will affect the army, make it a lot less survivable, because now you can't exactly anticipate waves of Genestealers. I'll also go over the points changes in a future video, but you can't just automatically bring these guys back. This is a core rule for that army, and so again, the Aeldari had a stratagem changed. but the core army rule for the Geneseal Cult has been nerfed. So that's huge. Huge for the army, right? Huge. The other thing is just for the Talon Jackals, the Outrider Gang's ability, they have to be wholly within 9 inches now. That's the other big change for Geneseal Cult. Once again, wholly within 9 inches of at least a battlefield edge, or at least one of its models must be touching one of your cult ambush markers. So, change there. Now, the big changes to Imperial Knights. Once again, the army got nerfed. So the first one is the Bondsman ability. It has been nerfed. So now it states, until the start of your next command phase, the Armager model that you selected is affected by the Bondsman ability, not the Questoris model. So now it's just the Armager model. That's a huge change, because you used to bond and then you both got the benefit, and the bigger guy is really usually what benefited from the benefit, right? Now it's gone. It's just the Armagers. So in this edition so far, their points increases. They can't see as well as they did before. They can't bond as well. They can't fire Overwatch. Right? Imperial Knights just took a huge, huge hit with this Balance Dataslate. Huge. Geneseal Cult, core rule that will certainly affect the way you build their armies and affect their survivability. Aeldari got affected by the core rule changes regarding devastating wounds, and their one stratagem. And then, of course, the other big thing that they did was they limited Desolation squads for Space Marines. Now it's the composition is just 1 Desolation Sergeant, 4 Desolation Marines. You have to have squads of 5. You can't do squads of 10 anymore. I like squads of 5 anyway, because that way you can just put them in different areas. Indirect fire keeps them alive anyway. So that's it. That is the data slate, the Balance Dataslate. So now, let me talk about the Balance Dataslate. And the purpose of the Balance Dataslate was to create balance. Now, there are point changes as well with the Munitorum. In fact, there's even Tyranid points changes. That kind of annoyed me. But the Codex hasn't come out yet, and there's already points changes. But the point of this Dataslate was to create more balance. And there were technically 4 armies that are really strong, right? Geneseal Cult, Imperial Knights, and Aeldari, as well as Custodies, right? They're 4 really strong armies. There's no real big change to Custodies, if I'm not mistaken. That, again, in this, maybe I'm wrong. Nothing jumps out to me for Custodies. Maybe some devastating wounds. Geneseal Cult had their core rule changed. Imperial Knights can't see over buildings anymore. They can't fire Overwatch for their big guys, and their big guys don't get to bond anymore. Huge changes. And Aeldari, they got a bunch of point increases, like 15 models and squads got point increases, a little bit of points increases, and I don't think it'll affect them too much. The devastating wounds will really affect Wraith Knight spam and some other squads. The indirect fire Overwatch will affect squads, but there's extreme balance within that codex. There are tons of competitive choices and ways to run an Eldar army, and I just don't feel they didn't nerf the army. They nerfed a couple core rules that affect the army. They didn't nerf the army, right? They nerfed Imperial Knights. The whole army is affected by the big changes. They nerfed Genestealer Cult. The whole army is affected by these changes. But the whole army is not affected for Eldar. So we've just taken an army that is beyond competitive and broken, made it a little bit more expensive, a little bit less efficient, but we've knocked down its competitors a lot more than we knocked it down. So maybe I'm wrong, and I don't want to be negative, but I just don't feel this did enough to bring Aeldari down. I've watched countless videos where Aeldari can table your opponent regardless of what your opponent does. They can leaf blow your opponent off the table with all the shenanigans. And the shenanigans haven't changed. The army rules haven't changed. The models rules haven't changed. The maneuverability, the firepower hasn't changed. The ability to spill a bunch of mortal wounds around the table has changed. Yes. And I think that is powerful. And they also bumped up the cost of Wraith Knights, so I think Wraith Knights will take a hit. But do I feel Eldar are anywhere less competitive? No. I feel that just a new lead squad is going to take the place of the old squads, you know, and they're going to destroy. That's my prediction. Again, I could be wrong. I just don't feel the Tyranid Codex, which is coming out this weekend, is going to stand up to Aeldari. I don't. None of the fun lists that I think about, or even the competitive lists that I think about, will match the Aeldari. And it's a brand new codex. I don't think it did enough. I think it brought down Aeldari's competitors, which I think you're going to start seeing, maybe starting next week, Aeldari as the top, or Aeldari Custodes, Aeldari at the top, because we've removed the two armies that can really compete with it and keep it in line. Now, a lot of the other armies got point decreases, which is great. You get slightly more models, you know, like I took a Dark Angels list that was 2,000 points before and it became 1,840 points today, so I can bring an extra squad. But that one extra squad with no different rules is not going to help them sustain the amount of firepower and shenanigans from an Aeldari army. That's just my thoughts. I don't know. So what do you think of this balanced data slate? Did it do enough? What are your favorite parts? What are your least favorite parts? Am I wrong? I just said I could be completely wrong. Yeah, I'm willing to put my name, my opinion out there, and I want your opinions. Please leave comments in the comment section about what you think about this balanced data slate. Did it do its job? Are you happy with the nerfs? Are you angry about the nerfs? What are your thoughts? Let's create a discussion. And as always, please like the video, comment in the comment section down below, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so. Helps a lot. Until next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting.